Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Hi friends, welcome to Meals to Unalive For, where we talk about a true crime case and I make a death row meal from scratch. I'm your host Jody Breton, and if you enjoy this episode, please like and subscribe. Come find me on all the things. I'm on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube. The best way to support me is to share my content and interact with it. Today we're going to be talking about a man named Tommy Lynn Sells, and he was a serial unaliver. Tommy was born June 28th, 1964 in Oakland, California, and he happened to have a twin sister named Tammy Jean. His mother's name was Nina Sells, and the man who she happened to be with at the time was not his father, even though they got his last name. It was said that Tommy was very close to his twin sister. I mean, I feel like that's pretty typical. But unfortunately, at 18 months, Tammy contracted spinal meningitis and unfortunately passed away. We can't be sure if Tommy ever had it, but it's definitely a possibility. It's also said that 1/3 of children who contract bacterial meningitis experience long term effects, and part of that is mental health, and it can also cause damage to the brain in severe cases. In children, it definitely comes out in behavior issues and some extreme obsessive behaviors, which would definitely describe Tommy later on and even in toddler years. So it's definitely a possibility. We just aren't completely sure. After Tommy recovered from everything that happened in his household, whether he was sick or, the passing of his sister, he was sent to live in Missouri with his aunt. This would honestly be the happiest part of Tommy's life. His aunt was very good to him, and he was with her for 2.5 years. And she actually wanted to adopt Tommy. But when Nina, Tommy's mother, found out, she immediately had him move back in with her. At this point, it was 1969, and Tommy was 5. His mother was also living in Missouri, so at least he didn't have to relocate states. But Nina did have other children, and they lived in a very small trailer, so Tommy wasn't very happy and definitely resented his mother for removing him from his happy home with his aunt. By only the age of 7, he started playing hooky from school and would steal his grandfather's booze. He very quickly learned that it numbed the pain of everything that was happening in his life, and this would be the start of a lifelong problem with addiction. Then, when Tommy turned 8, he met a man named Willis Clark who would go on to groom and molest Tommy. Tommy said that he didn't understand that this was wrong at the time because he was so young. And by the time he was 10 in 1974, he lived with Willis full time. It was said that his mother actually encouraged this interaction. Like, she didn't know about, the abuse going on, but she thought that the man was a good example for him. And she was working a lot of hours and she had other children to take care of. So I guess she didn't mind that he was with Willis quite a bit. And this is just a side note. What was the point in her removing him from his aunt's care? Because he was legitimately happy there, and then he just went on to stay with some random man because she didn't have time for him. What was the point? I don't understand this. I don't understand what the point of this was, but it just made me upset. Like, she should have just left him alone with his auntie. The abuse would manifest into weird behaviors. When Tommy was 13, he climbed into his grandmother's bed completely naked, and the family really didn't know what to do. They had him stay away from the family for a while because they were not sure how to handle that situation. Tommy did say shortly after in 1978, when he was 14, he came home from Willis's house to find the entire family gone. So he was left homeless and to fend for himself. To be honest, I'm not sure what to believe because according to Tommy, his family up and left and he was homeless. but none of the other family members in Tommy's family would corroborate this. So I'm not sure if Tommy lied about this or if the entire family just doesn't want to talk about it. Tommy would gather up a few of the belongings he had left, including a pistol, and he hitchhiked out of town. While in St. Louis, Missouri, he beat a woman with the barrel of his pistol. It's unknown what led up to this. We're not sure if she said something to upset him or if he just did it out of the blue or he tried to rob her. That much isn't clear. After he decided to hitchhike all over, he went to the Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls, and even Vegas. Then in the summer of 1979, Tommy broke into a small Mississippi home. He was looking for beer, so he snuck into the master bedroom where he found a middle aged couple, John and Kathleen Cade, fast asleep in bed. But as soon as he saw John, it reminded him of Willis, and memories of Willis's abuse flooded back into him. Tommy pulled the gun out of his pocket and shot the man and fled. John woke in a flash of pain and confusion. He ran to the bathroom to wash his bloody hands, then promptly fell unconscious and bled to death. Desperately, Kathleen called the police and they searched their home for the intruder, but Tommy was long gone. Tommy would go on to say that this was the first time that he actually unalived somebody, and it was the biggest adrenaline rush that he could achieve. Of course, Tommy got away with this crime because there was nothing linking to him and he wasn't part of the Mississippi community, so nobody even suspected him. By the early 1980s, Tommy made his way to California and settled in Los Angeles. There, he was homeless, so he had to fight for resources. Shortly after arriving in LA, he killed a man with an ice pick. They think over food or possibly drugs, but he was, again, never caught, probably because the LAPD was particularly swamped with murder cases that year. So, once again, he never faced any charges for that. Not long after, 16-year-old Tommy got into a gang-related fight that left him hospitalized with internal bleeding. Against doctors' wishes, he checked himself out of the hospital and surprisingly went back to his mother in St. Louis, Missouri. There, Nina welcomed him back with open arms and even nursed him back to health. Then, as a family in 1981, the whole family, including Tommy, moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. It seemed like everyone was getting along, but the peace didn't last very long. From my understanding, it seemed like Nina was trying to mother him and be an authority figure, and Tommy did not react to this well. So, as a result, he moved into an Arkansas youth home, but he still occasionally visited the family and his mother. During this entire time, Tommy was still a raging alcoholic and was doing drugs, but he also developed a new coping mechanism, which would be chasing women. He was constantly getting into new relationships, flirting with other women, and was a serious womanizer even at that young of an age. For Tommy, all women were viewed as sexual objects, and this was apparent that even his own mother was viewed that way. One day in May 1981, Nina was taking a shower before work. While she was shampooing her hair, she heard the bathroom door open, and 16-year-old Tommy tried to get in the shower and SA her, but Nina fought back, and eventually she got her son to back off. After this, obviously, their relationship was damaged. Nina wanted nothing to do with Tommy and couldn't be around him. She did have him admitted to the community mental health clinic in Jonesboro, Arkansas, as an outpatient. Tommy met with a psychologist who tried to get down to the bottom of his behavior, but unfortunately, he didn't mention the sexual assault that he faced when he was a child, so he really didn't end up getting any help. When he was asked why he attacked his mother, he replied, "I don't know who I am. I don't understand why I did it. I don't understand anything anymore." After he was released, he would once again become a drifter, sleeping in motels, abandoned cars, and just never really staying in any place very long. Then in March of 1982, Tommy received his first mark on his criminal record with a charge of public intoxication. Now, Tommy spent no time in jail, so this didn't seem to bother him very much, but I figured it's worth mentioning. About this time, Tommy falls in love with a woman named Cindy Hanna. But unfortunately, this really didn't last long. Cindy's father was a regular churchgoer and he did not approve of Tommy. And the final straw was him getting her pregnant later in 1982. So he completely cut him off from her and he never met his child or saw Cindy ever again. Later on, Tommy was walking through a wooded area of Arkansas. In the distance, he saw a house and didn't think twice about breaking in. He climbed through an unlocked window, then located the kitchen where he searched for something to eat, but didn't have enough time to find a meal before he came face to face with the homeowner, Hal Akins. Tommy ran into the woods out of the house, and Hal followed right after him. Tommy would end up stopping and then turning around and firing one shot at Hal, and unfortunately, he was hit, but fortunately, he did survive the ordeal. Hal unfortunately could not provide a description of his attacker, so once again, Tommy did not face any jail time or was even on a suspect list. Tommy also claimed that later in 1982, he and an accomplice kidnapped a woman from a restaurant outside of Little Rock. They drove her to an isolated area where they assaulted and murdered her, and the woman's identity still remains a mystery. Then in early 1983, he hitched a ride back to North St. Louis. There he became more stable, he got a job, we're not sure in what, and bought himself a car. Unfortunately, this wouldn't last, though. Tommy said that part of that reason was because he had such a strong addiction problem to drugs and alcohol. And unfortunately, by July 1983, he would fall back into his old patterns. At this point, Tommy was 19 and he had been watching a Missouri home of Thomas and Colleen Gill, a couple who owned a local beauty supply store. Tommy watched the couple for a while and he noticed that Thomas would work later nights, so he knew that he had plenty of time to make his assault. On a July evening, Tommy broke into the Gills' home. He found Colleen playing with her 4-year-old daughter, Tiffany. He wasted no time and used a blunt object to bludgeon them both to death. Upstairs, the couple's 1-year-old son, Sean, was fast asleep, but the sight of headlights coming up the driveway stopped Tommy from going upstairs. Thomas was home and he had to run. 10 seconds later, Thomas caught a glimpse of the dark, slender figure fleeing his home. Thomas came home to find his wife and daughter downstairs and his son unharmed upstairs. He immediately called the police and were able to give a brief description of the man who killed his family. Police were pretty baffled with this case because the motivation was obviously not burglary. Colleen's large diamond wedding ring had not been taken, nor did the home have anything missing from it. So they didn't know what to think of it. They really thought that Thomas was more than likely the main suspect or the person who did it, but clearly that wasn't the case. Once again, police did not suspect Tommy. He wasn't even on their radar, so the case went cold. In early 1984, Tommy would get into a relationship by the woman named Nicole Snow. He did end up getting her pregnant, and Nicole soon discovered that he wasn't the man that she thought he was. In May of 1984, 19-year-old Tommy was arrested for stealing a Ford Mustang and was sentenced to 2 years behind bars. Nicole gave birth to the baby while he was in prison, and not long after that, in February of 1985, Tommy was granted parole, but he would skip out on Nicole and he would never see them again. He went right back into his life of crime. He stole another car and ended up in Springfield, Missouri. One evening in July 1985, he loaded up on drugs and drove to a nearby carnival. There, he met a woman named Ina Court and her 4-year-old son, Rory. Together, they enjoyed the carnival, and Ina ended up offering Tommy a hot meal and to stay over at her place for the night. He came to her home later that night, and at first he excused himself to go to the bathroom, but when he came back, he saw that Ina was going through his backpack, and apparently this angered him. Tommy began beating Ina with a baseball bat he found lying around the house that belonged to Rory, and eventually he grabbed a kitchen knife from the kitchen and cut Ina's throat. Rory came down to see what all the commotion was about, and Tommy caught sight of the small child. Unfortunately, he did the exact same thing to Rory and he left the scene. Ina and Rory's bodies weren't discovered for 3 days, and once again, the case immediately went cold because police couldn't identify a motive or even a suspect. Then, in October of 1985, Tommy was arrested for drunk driving and parole violation, which led to another short stint in prison. After his release in 1986, he hitchhiked to Texas, where he got a job on a fishing boat. On one of these excursions, he actually overdosed on heroin and barely survived a near-death experience. And unlike a lot of other people, this did not push him to get clean or better himself. He just continued to be destructive to himself and others around him. Then in 1987, 23-year-old Tommy spotted a fellow hitchhiker, a 20-year-old woman trying to get to Nevada. Unfortunately, she would never make it. Tommy gave her a hit of LSD, and according to him, he strangled her in the middle of the desert. Later that year, he took a train east to a small town in Eden, Illinois. There, he targeted Keith and Eileen Darden, a couple with one child and another on the way. The couple was trying to sell a trailer, so we're assuming that Tommy posed as a buyer, then pushed his way into their home. Once he was in the home, he shot Keith and essayed Eileen. He then would bludgeon the pregnant woman and her young son to death. Once again, he was not even a suspect for this crime, and again, it went cold. September of 1988, Tommy claimed he assaulted and stabbed an 11-year-old New Hampshire girl, a girl named Melissa. He says he dumped her body on a set of railroad tracks near Boston, where it was found a few days later. Shortly after this, he hitchhiked all the way to Tucson, Arizona. Throughout December 1988, he survived mainly on money he made dealing cannabis, but one day an exchange went sour. One of Tommy's customers, Kent Lawton, called him a chump, and in response, Tommy slit his throat. Kent was dead within seconds, and Tommy disappeared from Arizona altogether. Once again, police were left confounded and they had no idea where to go from here. There was no clear motive, no consistent MO, and no pattern to Tommy's erratic movements at all. In 1990, Wyoming officers charged him with public intoxication and vehicle theft. He served another short sentence behind bars and would be released in January of 1991. While in custody in 1990, Tommy ended up in the hospital. It's unclear exactly why, but they think it was due to withdrawal symptoms. There, a doctor diagnosed him with a huge list of mental health issues, including depressive disorder, severe opioid, amphetamine, cannabis and alcohol dependency, polysubstance abuse of barbiturates, inhalants, and hallucinogens, a personality disorder with antisocial borderline and schizoid features. The list really keeps going on. Tommy had never had great mental health, but it seemed like as time went on, it was just getting worse and worse. In 1992, 27-year-old Tommy stood beneath an underpass in Charleston, West Virginia. He was panhandling to the traffic going by, and he had a sign that said, "Hungry, will work for food." 20-year-old Fabian Witherspoon would end up stopping and offering Tommy a home-cooked meal at her home. Tommy gave Fabian his real name and also said that he had a wife and children, making himself out to be a family man who was down on his luck. The two headed to her apartment and she grabbed 2 large bags and started filling them with food from her cupboards. Meanwhile, Tommy stood by the door taking note of her movements and planning his attack. Fabian graciously asked Tommy if anything else was needed, and he said that his wife needed some new clothes. So, too kind to refuse, Fabian went to her bedroom and started grabbing t-shirts for Tommy's imaginary spouse. While Fabian was distracted, Tommy grabbed a knife from the kitchen and then snuck up on Fabian. He told her to undress and led her to the bathroom where he began to assault her. Fabian fought back though. She grabbed a ceramic duck that was on the back of her toilet and hurled it into Tommy's head. The duck shattered, sending shards flying everywhere, and before he could get his bearings, Fabian started pummeling him with sharp pieces of broken glass. She even got the knife away from him and started stabbing him, slicing into his abdomen. But eventually, Tommy got the upper hand and started beating her. He bound her legs and feet together, and eventually she fell unconscious. Tommy made a small cut across her throat, thinking that he killed her, but fortunately, he didn't. She was just unconscious. When Fabian woke up, she quickly tried to get the bindings off and she called the police. Since Tommy had given her his real name, they quickly tracked him down and they were going to take him into custody, but Tommy had some pretty major injuries, so they took him to the hospital. His injuries were life threatening. He had been cut in the spleen, kidney, and had a collapsed lung, so he could have definitely died from what Fabian had done to him, which honestly, what a shame. While the case against Tommy seemed to be clear, unfortunately, it was much more complicated than that. Tommy's lawyers argued that first, there was no witnesses to the crime and no way for Fabian to prove that Tommy initiated the attack. Second, Tommy's defense team discovered that Fabian had recently filed an unrelated sexual assault charge against someone else, but there hadn't been enough evidence to prosecute that case. Finally, there was also some uncovered reports detailing Fabian's mental health and that it was poor, so they used this all to portray Fabian as an unreliable source and an accuser. Fabian unfortunately had to settle for a plea deal and drop the sexual assault charge, and Tommy was sentenced to 2 to 10 years behind bars. Honestly, this made me so mad when I read it. Fabian deserved so much more than what she got. She fought for her life and still did not really get the justice that she deserved. Tommy was sent to the West Virginia Northern Correctional Facility where he would serve out his time for what he did to Fabian. Later, he was caught smuggling a gun into the warden's office, so he was transferred to Mount Olive Correctional Complex, a maximum security facility in West Virginia. While at this new prison, Tommy met John Price, an inmate charged with causing the deaths of 3 people, and the two men became fast friends. They mostly talked about their families, and John mentioned that he had a sister who was named Nora and offered to introduce the two. And in beginning of 1995, Tommy met Nora when she came to visit. The two apparently fell in love, and in April of 1996, 31-year-old Tommy and 28-year-old Nora tied the knot in Mount Olive Prison. Now, it was said that Nora had a learning disability, so she received Social Security, but after they got married, all of her Social Security went to her husband. Tommy was released in May of 1997. He spent a few days with Nora, then hitchhiked to Michigan without even saying goodbye. He did end up calling Nora June 1st and apologized for his sudden absence. He came back to West Virginia, but as soon as he was home, he started talking about leaving again. Tommy convinced Nora to move to Cleveland, Tennessee with him, and the couple settled right in. Soon after, Tommy started doing drugs again, and he received a ticket for driving without a license in late July. 2 weeks after he received that ticket, he took off again without saying anything to Nora. She would return to West Virginia heartbroken. And once again, he would go back to West Virginia and try to patch things up with his wife, Nora. In September of 1997, Tommy and Nora would actually move in with his mother, Nina, back in St. Louis, Missouri. Tommy got a job at a local auto shop and stayed sober. Nora would end up pregnant, but Tommy was not excited. All the stress apparently caused Tommy to go back to addiction. In October of 1997, 33-year-old Tommy Lynn Sells abandoned his pregnant wife, Nora, and went to the streets of St. Louis. Later that October, Tommy got his hands on a van and drove to Springfield, Missouri. There, he targeted 13-year-old Stephanie Mahaney. Stephanie's mother, Suzette, was sick with pneumonia, so she was in the hospital and Stephanie was all alone at their apartment. Tommy snuck into the apartment where he taped Stephanie's mouth shut before she could even wake up and then kidnapped her and put her in the back of his van. He then drove her to the Missouri countryside where nobody could hear her. He then injected her with a near fatal dose of cocaine. Tommy then essayed her and then strangled her to death. He dropped her body into a small pond. Her mother, Suzette, immediately notified police that she was missing, but unfortunately, they didn't find her body until over a month later. Once again, the case went cold and there was no suspects. In April 1999, Tommy hitchhiked to North Carolina and got a job at a carnival, which took him to San Antonio, Texas. Tommy was purposely looking out for unattended children while he was working at the carnival, and this would happen on April 18th. 9-year-old Mary Bia Perez was a third grader who wandered away from her family. Tommy would kidnap the young girl, throw her in his truck, and speed away. He drove the 9-year-old to an abandoned area near small San Antonio Creek. There, Tommy would assault her and then strangle her with her own t-shirt. Unfortunately, she wasn't found until 10 days later by a fisherman. Tommy immediately ditched his truck and then caught a train north to Lexington, Kentucky. Shortly after, in May of 1999, Tommy spotted 13-year-old Haley McCone alone in a public park. He watched her for a while to make sure that there was nobody with her while she was swinging on the swings. He snatched her off the swings and then took her to a wooded walking trail not too far from the park. There, he assaulted her, but right in the middle of the attack, a couple strode by Tommy. He pressed his hand over Haley's mouth and froze. Unfortunately, the couple didn't notice Haley or Tommy, even though that they were just a few feet away. They just didn't know that they were there, and soon after, Tommy strangled Haley to death. He left Haley's body in the trees and fled the scene and found a place to get drunk that same night. Kentucky authorities actually arrested him for public intoxication, but they released him the very next morning, oblivious to the murder that he just committed. Immediately after he was released, he took a train to Madison, Wisconsin. Days after arriving, he was back in police custody for threatening locals with a box cutter. They kept him in jail for about a month and then released him back onto the streets. In late June, he got his hands on a truck and gunned it south to Oklahoma. He didn't waste any time. In early July 1999, he kidnapped 14-year-old Bobby Lynn Wolford from a convenience store. Just north of Oklahoma City, he brutally assaulted her, but she kept fighting. Not wanting a repeat with Fabian, Tommy shot Bobby and threw her body off the side of a rural road without looking back. Right after this, he went all the way to South Texas. As soon as he got to Del Rio, he started looking to commit another crime, but this time he wanted to be more calculated. As a way to get close to someone unsuspecting, he began attending church services where he met a couple named Terry and Crystal Harris. The first thing Tommy noticed about the Harrises was their daughter, 13-year-old Katie. The moment he saw her, he decided that she was the perfect victim. Through the church grapevine, Tommy discovered that in December of that year, they planned to help their friend Pam relocate from Kansas to Texas, and that Pam's 10-year-old daughter Crystal was going to stay with the Harris family during the move. They also discovered that Terry Harris planned to drive to Kansas on December 30th to help Pam pack. So he would be out of the house and his wife would be alone with the two girls. Tommy spent December 30th getting drunk at bars and then left around 2 a.m. He then headed to the Harris's home. He had a 12-inch boning knife and crawled through the girl's window. Tommy tried to sexually assault Katie, but she screamed and tried to run away. So as a result, he slit her throat and she quickly passed. He then noticed Crystal rustling, and so he grabbed her arm and then attempted to slit her neck, and he did get her windpipe, but amazingly, he missed her major artery. So she was still alive, but she pretended to be deceased in hopes that he would leave. Tommy slipped out one of the windows once again and then left. But little did he know that Crystal was still alive. She waited for him to leave, and then, fearing that everyone in the house had been murdered, she ran to the nearest neighbors to call the police. Crystal was able to give an accurate description of what Tommy looked like, and as a result, they found him and arrested him very shortly after. After being arrested, Tommy started confessing to all of the murders that he had done. It said that he confessed up to 70 different murders, but police only confirmed 22, but that's still a huge number of murders. Tommy Lynn Sells was sentenced to death for the murder of Katie in Texas, but he had many, many other charges added to what was a very long crime spree. Shortly before he was executed, they did an interview with him that I'm going to let you listen to here.
First time I killed somebody, and it was such a rush. I was raised to do time. I wasn't raised to live out there in that world. I like to use a knife. A gun is too violent, too noisy, but just fit my hand well. I'm not Billy the Kid making notches on my holster, so I know it's been a lot. I don't have an on and off switch. I'm just after that drug. I'm after that feeling. It's complicated. When people enter my life, they get hurt. When you look at me, you know what hate is, because I don't know what love is. Two words I don't like to use is love and sorry, because I'm about hate. A lot of jerking, a lot of movement. It's a physical, you become part of it. I don't have no feelings no more, no emotion, no. And I like to watch the eyes fade, the pupil fade. It's just like setting their soul free. If we was in a fight and get your head down in the concrete, then so be it. But well, what do you think happened? It cracks like a coconut. I think every time I killed that guy that molested me all them years. I seen that in my mind over and over. I suffer more here than I'll ever suffer in that grave. I have to live with it every day now. When they kill me, at least I'll be free then.
Tommy Lynn Sells was executed by lethal injection April 3rd, 2014. At this point in Texas, they no longer did last meals, and he did not have any last words to say. Now, since he didn't have a last meal plan, I went ahead and just picked one. I'll be honest with you guys, I just really wanted to make some homemade cinnamon rolls, so that's what I did. I made a whole breakfast spread, so I'm not going to rate this one since that's not really what he chose, but honestly, I still really enjoyed making this meal. It was delicious. And that is the story of Tommy Lynn Sells. I think that it was pretty crazy. I felt very sorry for a lot of the victims who did not get justice, Fabian included. She was so brave and faced him in court, and it still wasn't enough. And as a result, he was let out and unfortunately unalived even more people. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, how you felt about this case, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.